Hi, I'm Madison Rivers. I'm an art student at a small community college in Ohio. But that day, standing in that bankruptcy courtroom, I said the words that completely destroyed my parents' world. Your Honor, I am the owner of the house they're living in. I can still see their faces, the color draining from my mother's cheeks, my father's mouth hanging open like he'd been slapped. My brother Tyler sitting there in his designer suit, looking between me and our parents like he was watching a car crash in slow motion. The judge raised his eyebrows, shuffled through some papers, and said, "Miss Rivers, can you please step forward and explain this to the court?" That's when everything changed. That's when 24 years of being treated like the family burden finally made sense. But let me back up, because to understand why that moment felt so good, you need to know what led me there. Have you ever been the invisible child in your own family? The one who gets blamed for everything while your sibling can do no wrong? Because that was my entire life until 18 months ago. 2 years before that courtroom revelation, I was working 3 jobs just to survive. I'd wake up at 4:30 a.m. to open the coffee shop downtown, work until 1 p.m., then spend my afternoons walking dogs for busy professionals. Evenings, I cleaned office buildings until midnight. I was exhausted, broke, and completely alone, even though I lived in the same house as my family. My parents, Dave and Patricia Rivers, weren't poor. Dad worked as a marketing director, pulling in about $120,000 a year. Mom sold real estate and made around $80,000. They had a nice 4-bedroom house in a decent neighborhood, drove reliable cars, took annual vacations. But somehow, none of that security ever extended to me. See, in the Rivers family, there was Tyler, the golden child, and then there was me, the disappointment they couldn't quite figure out what to do with. Tyler got everything, and I mean everything. When he graduated high school, they bought him a brand new BMW. Not used, not certified pre-owned. Brand new with that new car smell and the temporary tag still in the window. When I graduated 6 months later with a 3.8 GPA and acceptance letters to 3 different art schools, I got a card with $50 in it and a speech about learning to be realistic about my future. Tyler's college tuition, fully paid. Room and board, books, spending money, spring break trips, all covered. He went to a prestigious private university and studied business, which my parents called a smart investment in his future. When I asked about college help, my mother, Patricia, looked at me like I'd asked her to fund a trip to Mars. "Madison, honey, art isn't a real career. Tyler's getting a business degree. That's practical. If you want to go to college, you'll need to figure it out yourself. It'll build character." Character. That was their favorite word when it came to me. Everything was about building my character, while Tyler's character apparently came pre-installed and perfect. I remember this one dinner. It was a Tuesday night, and I'd just gotten home from my 3rd job. I was exhausted, my feet hurt, and I still had homework to do. Tyler was there visiting from college, and my parents were fawning over him like he'd just been crowned King of America. He was telling them about some business plan he was working on, how he needed $5,000 to get it started. Without hesitation, my father reached for his checkbook. "Of course, son, this sounds like a great opportunity." I watched him write that check like it was nothing. $5,000, just like that. Meanwhile, earlier that week, I'd asked if they could help me pay for art supplies, $60 worth of paints and canvases for a class project. My mother had sighed and said, "Madison, you need to learn to budget better. We can't just hand you money every time you want something." $60 versus $5,000. For art supplies for school versus some half-baked business idea Tyler had thought up that afternoon. The favoritism wasn't subtle. It was blatant, obvious, and somehow I was the only one who seemed to notice it. When I tried to bring it up, I got the same response every time. "We treat you both equally, Madison. You're being dramatic." Dramatic. That was the other word they loved to use about me. Anytime I expressed frustration, anytime I pointed out the obvious differences in how they treated us, I was being dramatic or having victim mentality. Tyler got a fully furnished apartment near campus. I got lectures about how living at home would help me save money. Tyler got a credit card with a $10,000 limit that my parents paid off every month. I got a lecture about fiscal responsibility when I overdrafted my checking account by $12. The isolation was the worst part. I wasn't just financially cut off from my family, I was emotionally cut off too. They planned vacations for 3 people. They made dinner reservations for 3. They took Christmas photos with 3 people. I wasn't even an afterthought. I was completely forgotten. Last Christmas, I came downstairs to find them loading suitcases into the car. "Where are you going?" I asked. "Oh, we're taking Tyler to Aspen for a ski trip," my mother said, not even looking at me. "We figured you wouldn't be interested. You don't ski." "I've never had the chance to learn," I said. She shrugged. "Well, there you go. We'll be back on the 28th. There's leftover pizza in the fridge." They left me alone for Christmas. My brother, who could have said something, who could have insisted I come along, just threw his ski jacket over his shoulder and said, "See you later, Matt." That night, sitting in an empty house on Christmas Eve, eating cold pizza and watching other people's families on TV, I started to believe what they'd been telling me my whole life. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was dramatic, ungrateful, unrealistic. Maybe I deserved to be treated like a burden because that's what I was. My friends noticed, of course. My best friend Jasmine from high school came over once and saw Tyler's BMW in the driveway next to my bicycle. She asked me straight up, "Madison, what's going on with your family? Why does Tyler get everything while you're working 3 jobs just to afford community college?" I made excuses. I always made excuses. "They're just trying to teach me responsibility," I'd say. "Tyler's older. He needs more help getting started." The lies came so easily because I'd been telling them to myself for years. But deep down, in the quiet moments between jobs when I was walking dogs through nice neighborhoods, looking at families through their windows, I knew something was wrong. Normal parents don't treat their children this differently. Normal parents don't forget one child while spoiling the other. I just didn't know how wrong it was until Grandpa William died. Grandpa William was my father's father, and he was the only person in the family who ever seemed to see me clearly. While my parents dismissed my art as just a hobby, Grandpa would ask to see my latest paintings. While they treated my jobs like character-building exercises, he treated them like the survival strategy they actually were. He lived in a modest house across town, drove an old Honda Civic, and wore the same 3 sweaters in rotation. To look at him, you'd think he was just another retired guy living on Social Security. He never talked about money, never flashed wealth around, never made a big deal about anything material, but he paid attention to people. Real attention. I remember the last time I saw him conscious. I was visiting him in the hospital, and my parents had just left after a 10-minute visit where they mostly talked about Tyler's latest business venture. Grandpa waited until they were gone, then reached into his bedside table drawer. "Madison, I want you to have this," he said, pulling out an old gold pocket watch. It was heavy, real gold, with intricate engravings around the edges. "This belonged to my father and his father before that. It's been passed down through the Rivers family for 4 generations." I held it carefully, feeling the weight of it. "Grandpa, this is beautiful, but shouldn't Tyler have this? He's the eldest grandson." Grandpa's eyes got sharp, the way they did when he was about to say something important. "Tyler gets plenty, sweetheart. This watch goes to the person who understands its real value. This is the legacy of the Rivers family, not money or status, but the understanding that family means taking care of each other. You're the only one who's learned that lesson." I didn't understand what he meant then. The watch felt nice, sure, but mostly I was touched that he'd thought of me. My parents, predictably, were less impressed when they heard about it later. "Of course, Dad gave Madison the old watch," my mother said with an eye roll. "He always played favorites with her for some reason." "Probably worth $50 at a pawn shop," Tyler added with a laugh. "Sorry, Mad. Looks like you're not getting rich off Grandpa's junk." They laughed about it. My inheritance, this beautiful, meaningful piece of family history, was a joke to them. Grandpa died 3 days later. The funeral was small, and I was the only one who cried real tears. My parents were already talking about settling his estate, going through his house, figuring out if there was anything valuable. Tyler was on his phone during the service, texting with his girlfriend about weekend plans. 6 months later, I got the call that changed everything. "Miss Rivers, this is Harrison Beckham from Beckham and Associates. I was your grandfather's attorney. Could you come in to discuss his will? And please, Don't mention this to your parents yet. Your grandfather was very specific about that. I thought it was weird, but I figured Grandpa maybe left me some more family keepsakes or wanted to make sure I got a few of his paintings. I took a half day off work, losing money I couldn't afford to lose, and drove to the lawyer's office in downtown Columbus. Mr. Beckham was exactly what you'd picture when you think family lawyer, mid-60s, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, an office full of law books and family photos. He had a thick manila envelope on his desk with my name written on it in Grandpa's careful handwriting. "Miss Rivers, please sit down," he said, and something in his tone made me nervous. "Your grandfather left very specific instructions about how to handle this. He wanted to make sure you were alone when you heard this." He opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of documents that looked like they weighed 5 pounds. Bank statements, investment portfolios, property deeds, stock certificates. My eyes couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. "Miss Rivers, your grandfather left you his entire estate. This includes his investment portfolio, his real estate holdings, and his liquid assets. The total value is approximately $50.2 million. The room went silent except for the ticking of the clock on his wall. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, waiting for him to say, "Just kidding," or "There's been a mistake." But he just sat there, patient and serious, waiting for me to process what he'd just said. "I'm sorry, what?" $50.2 million, Miss Rivers. Your grandfather was a very successful investor. He started buying real estate in the 1970s when properties were cheap, invested early in technology companies, made very smart financial decisions for over 50 years. He lived modestly, but he was quite wealthy. I felt like I was going to throw up. But that's impossible. He drove an old Honda. He lived in that tiny house. He shopped at thrift stores. Mr. Beckham smiled. Your grandfather believed in living below his means. He always said that money was a tool, not a trophy. He accumulated wealth not to spend it on himself, but to make sure his family would be taken care of. "But why me?" I asked. "I mean, Tyler is the oldest." "My parents. They're his children." Mr. Beckham pulled out a letter, also in Grandpa's handwriting. "He left you this explanation. Would you like me to read it, or would you prefer to read it privately?" My hands were shaking too much to hold paper steady. "You read it." He cleared his throat and began, "My dear Madison, if you're hearing this, then I'm gone, and you're sitting in Harrison's office probably feeling shocked and confused. Let me explain. For years, I watched your parents treat you like you were less valuable than your brother. I watched them give Tyler every opportunity while making you work for scraps. I watched them dismiss your talents, ignore your achievements, and treat you like an inconvenience in your own family." My eyes started filling with tears. "I also watched you handle it with grace. You worked 3 jobs without complaining. You put yourself through school. You never asked for more than you needed. And you never begrudged Tyler his advantages even when they were unfair. You showed me what the Rivers family values actually mean. Hard work, dignity, and taking care of yourself when no one else will." Mr. Beckham paused, looking at me over his glasses. "Should I continue?" I nodded, wiping my eyes with a tissue from the box he'd pushed across his desk. "This money comes with only one condition. Don't tell your parents about it until they've learned to treat you with respect. You'll know when that time comes. Until then, use this inheritance to build the life you deserve, to pursue your art, to never again feel like you have to beg for basic dignity from people who should love you unconditionally. The pocket watch I gave you has a key to a safety deposit box at First National Bank. Inside that box, you'll find additional documents and instructions. Madison, you were always my favorite grandchild because you were the only one who understood that love isn't about what you can get from someone, it's about what you're willing to give. I love you, sweetheart. Make me proud. Grandpa William." I sat in that lawyer's office and cried harder than I had at the funeral. $50 million. $50 million. It was more money than I could even conceptualize, but more than that, it was validation. Someone had seen how unfairly I'd been treated. Someone had cared enough to do something about it. That pocket watch became my secret weapon. Inside the safety deposit box, I found documents that would make even more sense later. Property deeds, investment strategies, and most importantly, a detailed plan Grandpa had laid out for what he called teaching moments. I decided to follow his advice and keep the inheritance secret, but I wasn't going to be passive about it. If my parents wanted to treat me like I was worthless, maybe it was time they learned what losing me actually cost them. The first thing I did was hire Sarah Chen, a financial advisor who specialized in helping young people manage sudden wealth. She was amazing, patient, discreet, and most importantly, she understood why I wanted to keep this quiet. "What you're planning is completely legal," she assured me during our first meeting. "Your grandfather clearly intended for you to have options. Now, what do you want to accomplish with this?" I thought about it for weeks. I could have just disappeared, bought myself a house somewhere else, started over completely. But that felt like running away, and I'd spent my whole life running from confrontation with my family. This time, I wanted them to face the consequences of their choices. That's when I learned about my parents' mortgage situation. They'd refinanced the house twice in the last 5 years, once to pay for Tyler's college and once to fund his first failed business venture. They owed $380,000 on a house worth maybe $420,000, and they were struggling to make payments on Dad's reduced salary. What if, I asked Sarah, hypothetically, someone wanted to buy that mortgage from the bank? She raised an eyebrow. That someone would essentially become the homeowner's landlord. Why do you ask? I explained the situation, and Sarah's expression shifted from confusion to something like admiration. "Madison, that's actually brilliant and perfectly legal. You'd be providing them with payment flexibility while putting yourself in a position of, let's call it, influence." We set up a shell company called River Holdings LLC. The name felt appropriate. It honored Grandpa while keeping my identity completely hidden. Within 6 weeks, River Holdings had purchased my parents' mortgage from the bank at a slight discount. Suddenly, instead of owing Chase Bank $380,000, my parents owed River Holdings LLC $380,000. The beautiful part? They had no idea who owned River Holdings LLC. All they knew was that their new mortgage company was offering them better terms. Lower interest rate, more flexible payment schedule. They were thrilled. "Finally, some good luck," my mother said over dinner one night. "This new mortgage company is so much more reasonable than the bank was." I smiled and passed the potatoes. "That's great, Mom. You deserve some good fortune." Tyler, who was visiting for the weekend and complaining about his latest business struggles, looked up from his phone. "What's the name of the company?" "River Holdings something," Dad said. "Funny coincidence with our last name, right? Maybe it's a sign." I nearly choked on my water. If only they knew. But I wasn't done. Over the next several months, I started positioning myself strategically. I kept working my jobs. I didn't want anyone getting suspicious about sudden wealth, but I began making subtle changes. I hired a private investigator named Marcus Thompson to help me document the differential treatment I'd received growing up. I knew that if this ever came to a head legally, I'd need proof of the pattern. Marcus was thorough. He found credit card statements showing thousands spent on Tyler's college expenses in the same months my parents claimed they couldn't afford to help me with a $50 textbook. He found receipts from family vacations, restaurant reservations, even Christmas gift purchases, all showing a clear pattern of 3 family members being included while I was excluded. "Madison," Marcus said during one of our meetings, "I've seen a lot of family disputes, but this level of documented favoritism is unusual. Most parents at least try to hide it." "They never thought they needed to hide it," I replied. "They never thought anyone was paying attention." "Well, your grandfather was paying attention," Marcus said, tapping the folder of evidence. "And now you have proof." But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source, Tyler himself. I'd been documenting our family interactions more carefully, keeping a journal of conversations, and taking screenshots when my family shared things on social media. Tyler, who overshared everything online, had posted years of content that told the story better than I ever could. Photos of him in Aspen with our parents, captioned, "Best family vacation ever," posted on the same Christmas they'd left me home alone. Pictures of his BMW with the caption, "So grateful for parents who believe in investing in their kids' futures." Pictures of his graduation party, his apartment, his spring break trips, all funded by our parents and all documented in real time. But Tyler also had a habit of complaining publicly when things didn't go his way. I found posts from his college years griping about our parents. "Dad is being such a hard ass about my credit card bill. It's like he expects me to live on a budget or something." And "Mom won't co-sign for my new apartment lease. Apparently, I need to prove I'm financially responsible first. So unfair." The irony was incredible. Tyler, who'd received hundreds of thousands of dollars in support, was publicly complaining about the rare occasions when our parents didn't immediately give him everything he wanted. Meanwhile, I'd been completely financially independent since I turned 18, and they acted like I was the burden. Mrs. Elena Rodriguez, our next-door neighbor for over 20 years, became an unexpected ally. She approached me one day when I was walking to work. "Mija," she said, "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I've watched your family for a long time. The way they treat you compared to your brother, it's not right." I was surprised. I'd always assumed nobody outside the family noticed. "I see everything from my kitchen window," she continued. "I see you walking to work in the rain while Tyler's car sits in the driveway. I see you carrying groceries home on the bus while they take family trips without you. If you ever need someone to speak up about what they've put you through, I'm here." Having an outside witness validate what I'd experienced was more healing than I'd expected. For years, I'd questioned my own perceptions because my family insisted I was being dramatic. But Mrs. Rodriguez had seen it all, and she was willing to testify to it if necessary. As my parents' financial situation got worse, the family dynamics became even more obvious. Dad's marketing company downsized, and he was laid off after 15 years. Mom's real estate license was suspended after a client filed a complaint about her missing important deadlines and not returning calls promptly. Suddenly, they were facing serious money problems for the first time in their adult lives, and their response was predictable. They expected Tyler to step up and help support them. The problem was Tyler was broke too. His latest business venture, some kind of drop shipping company he'd started with their money, had failed spectacularly. He owed suppliers, he owed his business partner, and he owed about $30,000 in credit card debt that he'd assumed our parents would help him pay off. Instead of addressing their spending habits or making realistic financial plans, my parents started panicking. They talked about selling the house, about Dad taking early retirement from his 401k, about asking relatives for loans. But they never once asked me for help. Even when they were facing financial crisis, it never occurred to them that their daughter, who'd been financially independent for years and clearly knew how to manage money, might be in a position to assist them. I watched them struggle for months. I watched Dad apply for jobs he was overqualified for and get rejected. I watched Mom try to get her real estate license reinstated and face bureaucratic delays. I watched Tyler move back in with them and contribute nothing while they stretched their budget to feed another person. And through it all, they kept making their mortgage payments to River Holdings, LLC, never knowing they were paying their own daughter. The mortgage payments weren't their only expense, though. When they fell behind on their other bills, utilities, credit cards, car payments, I had another opportunity to help them anonymously. I set up payment arrangements through different shell companies. River Holdings, LLC paid their electric bill. River's Property Management handled their water and garbage. River's Financial Services mysteriously paid off Tyler's most pressing credit card debt to keep him from damaging the family's credit score further. They thought they were getting help from various business entities that had taken pity on their situation. They had no idea that every dollar keeping them afloat was coming from the daughter they'd spent decades treating like a financial burden. The irony was beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. For the first time in my life, I was actually taking care of my family, and they had no idea. But I knew this arrangement couldn't last forever. They needed to face the reality of their situation, and I needed to face the reality of mine. I couldn't hide behind shell companies and anonymous payments forever. The breaking point came when Tyler announced his newest get-rich-quick scheme. He'd heard about cryptocurrency and was convinced he could make millions if our parents would just loan him $50,000 to get started. It's a sure thing, he insisted during a family dinner that I was, surprisingly, invited to attend. My friend Derek made $200,000 in 6 months. All I need is seed money. Indeed. Our parents, who were behind on their own bills and borrowing money from their retirement savings to pay for groceries, were actually considering it. Maybe we could take out a home equity loan, Mom suggested. Or I could cash out more of my 401k, Dad added. I watched them discuss going further into debt to fund another one of Tyler's fantasies, and I realized nothing had changed. They were still willing to sacrifice their own financial security for Tyler while treating me like I didn't exist. That's when I made the decision to let everything collapse. I stopped making their anonymous payments. River Holdings LLC continued to accept their mortgage payments, but I let their utilities get shut off. I let Tyler's credit card companies start calling. I let the collection agencies begin their work. Within 6 weeks, they were facing foreclosure on the house, their electricity was cut off, and Tyler was being sued by 2 different creditors. And finally, they filed for bankruptcy. The bankruptcy hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in January. I took the day off work, put on the most professional outfit I owned, and drove to the courthouse. I sat in the back row where my family couldn't see me, watching as they explained their financial situation to Judge Henderson. Mr. and Mrs. Rivers, according to your filing, you owe approximately $850,000 in combined debts, and your primary asset is your family home, currently valued at $420,000. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, my father said, his voice shaking. We've lived in that house for 30 years. Our children grew up there. It has so much sentimental value to our family. I almost laughed. Sentimental value. They'd refinanced that house twice to pay for Tyler's expenses, while I was working 3 jobs and sleeping on a mattress on the floor. We know we made some financial mistakes, my mother added, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. But we were just trying to help our son get started in life. We never expected everything to go so wrong. Tyler sat beside them looking ashamed but saying nothing. Even in bankruptcy court, he couldn't manage to take responsibility for the role he'd played in their financial destruction. Judge Henderson reviewed their paperwork. I see here that your home is currently owned by River Holdings LLC. Can you explain this arrangement? We refinanced with them about 18 months ago, Dad explained. They offered much better terms than our previous lender. We've been making all our payments on time. That's interesting, Judge Henderson said, flipping through more pages. Because according to these documents, River Holdings LLC is requesting to be heard in these proceedings as a concerned creditor. That's when I stood up. Your Honor, I represent River Holdings LLC. The courtroom went silent. My parents turned around, and I watched their faces go through a series of emotions: confusion, recognition, and then something like terror. Madison? My mother whispered. I walked to the front of the courtroom, my heart pounding but my voice steady. Your Honor, my name is Madison Rivers. I am the sole owner of River Holdings LLC, which means I am the current owner of the property my parents are living in. Judge Henderson looked from me to my parents and back again. Miss Rivers, this is highly unusual. Can you explain how you came to own your parents' home? I pulled out the folder of documents Sarah had prepared for me. 18 months ago, I inherited $50.2 million from my grandfather, William Rivers. I used a portion of that inheritance to purchase my parents' mortgage when they were facing foreclosure. They are currently living in the house as tenants, though they were not informed of the ownership change. You inherited $50 million? Judge Henderson asked, clearly surprised. Yes, Your Honor. My grandfather left me his entire estate with specific instructions not to inform my family until they had learned to treat me with respect. I could hear my mother crying behind me, but I kept my focus on the judge. Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence of the financial discrimination I experienced in this family, which led to my grandfather's decision. Over the next 20 minutes, I presented everything. Bank statements showing the thousands spent on Tyler while I received nothing. Photos documenting family vacations and celebrations I was excluded from. Social media posts proving the differential treatment. Mrs. Rodriguez's written testimony about what she'd witnessed over the years. Furthermore, Your Honor, for the past 8 months, I have been anonymously paying my family's utility bills, credit card debts, and other expenses through various holding companies, trying to prevent exactly this situation. They have been surviving financially because of my support without knowing it. The judge was quiet for a long moment, reviewing all the evidence. Finally, he looked up at my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Rivers, is this information accurate? Did you treat your children this differently? My father was staring at his hands. My mother was crying too hard to speak. It was Tyler who finally answered. Yes, Your Honor. It's all true. I got everything handed to me while Madison worked for everything she had. I never really thought about how unfair it was until right now. Judge Henderson nodded slowly. Miss Rivers, what is your intention regarding the family home? This was the moment I'd been planning for months, but suddenly I felt no satisfaction in it. Looking at my parents, really looking at them for maybe the first time in years, I saw how broken they were, how scared, how old they looked. Your Honor, I don't want revenge. I want acknowledgement. I want my family to understand that their treatment of me was wrong, and I want them to commit to doing better. I turned to face my parents directly. I'm willing to work out a payment plan that allows you to stay in the house as tenants. Fair market rent, reasonable terms. But Tyler needs to get a job and start paying his own way. And you both need to acknowledge that the way you treated me was not okay. My mother stood up, her makeup streaked with tears. Madison, baby, we had no idea. We never knew Grandpa had money. We never meant to hurt you. But you did hurt me, I said calmly. For 24 years, you made me feel like I was worth less than Tyler. You made me believe I was a burden, that I didn't deserve the same love and support you gave him freely. We do love you, Dad said, his voice cracking. We've always loved you. Then you should have shown it, I replied. Love isn't just a feeling. It's actions. It's choices. And your choices made it clear that Tyler mattered more. Judge Henderson cleared his throat. This is certainly the most unusual bankruptcy case I've presided over. Miss Rivers, your offer seems generous given the circumstances. Mr. and Mrs. Rivers, do you accept your daughter's terms? They nodded, still crying. Tyler? The judge asked. My brother looked up at me with something I'd never seen in his eyes before. Respect, maybe, or recognition. Madison, I'm sorry. I'm really, really sorry. I took everything for granted, and I let them treat you badly without ever standing up for you. I'll get a job. I'll pay my debts. And I'll try to be the brother you deserve to have. For the first time in our adult lives, Tyler sounded sincere. That evening, we all sat around the kitchen table in the house I now owned, having the most honest conversation our family had ever had. I brought out Grandpa's pocket watch and read them his letter, explaining why he'd left everything to me. He saw what I couldn't see, I told them. He saw that you were raising Tyler to be dependent while forcing me to be independent. He saw that you valued Tyler's comfort over my dignity. And he decided to balance the scales. What happens now? Mom asked quietly. Now you learn to treat me like family, I said. Real family. Equal family. Tyler gets a job and starts taking care of himself. You both figure out how to rebuild your lives without depending on handouts or get-rich-quick schemes. And we see if we can actually build the relationship we should have had all along. And the money? Tyler asked. The inheritance? I smiled for the first time all day. I'm starting a scholarship fund for kids who come from families like ours. Kids who are overlooked, undervalued, treated like burdens while their siblings get everything. Grandpa's money is going to make sure other kids don't have to work 3 jobs just to prove their worth. That pocket watch sits on my mantle now, next to photos from our new family dinners, the ones where all 4 of us are included, where Tyler talks about his new job in logistics instead of his latest scheme, where my parents ask about my art and actually listen to the answers. It took a bankruptcy hearing to make my family see me clearly, but finally, after 24 years, I'm not invisible anymore. I'm not the burden or the disappointment or the dramatic one. I'm Madison Rivers, the granddaughter who understood what family really means and the daughter who taught her parents the same lesson. The inheritance wasn't just $50 million. It was permission to value myself and the power to demand that others do the same. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Have you ever been treated like you mattered less while watching someone else get everything handed to them? Tell me your story in the comments. I'll read every single one, and I promise you this, I'll believe you. Because you deserve to be valued, you deserve to be seen, and you deserve to be loved for exactly who you are.